Good afternoon and welcome to the Regional District of Kootenay Boundary Emergency Operations Centre Freshet 2020 Advanced Planning Team update. We're providing some more information about what's coming over the long weekend related to Freshet, snowmelt, weather, and so on. And we've got some interesting information today that shows a bit of the complexity of the forecasts coming up this weekend. And my name is Frances Maika. I'm the Information Officer in the Emergency Operations Center, and I'm going to turn it over to Graham Watt to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's everyone doing today? All right, so I'm going to share my screen here. And there we go. So what we're seeing here, once again, is the watershed boundary on Google Earth. We'll show you how to get this data a little bit later on. We've got a new, well, it's been around for a little while, but a new data product that we wanted to show off from the United States, from their river forecasting and snow monitoring folks. They're actually showing snow water equivalent, which is modeled from satellite data and weather information. And you can take a look at how much snow approximately as water is in different parts of the watershed. Of course, you can look east and see there's lots of snow over in the Kootenays. Now in the boundary, of course, the valleys are all dry, and as we get up even through the passes, it's getting pretty melted out through Monashee Pass, and of course up McCulloch area, and really the plateau country is diminishing. One of the interesting things that you can look at with this model is the amount of snow melt over a 24-hour period. So this red picture here, we're seeing 5, 10, 15, 25 millimeters per 24 hours of melting away of the snowpack. And so we're really seeing the kind of plateau country looking like it'll disappear over the next week or so for snowpack. And that is, for those of us involved in the Emergency Operations Center, a promising sign of the end of the freshet season. And we'll see how the weather goes over the next few days. This information comes from the National Operational Hydrologic Remote Sensing Center. I'll share the data with the RDKB so it can be added to the website. I've got a suite of tabs I think everybody would be interested in, but you can take a look at the links and follow from them from there. So this is once again data you can go in and query. You can go back in time and look at 2018 to compare how we were then, or you can look at 2017 and look at all kinds of different data like snow water equivalent, shallow snow water, snow temperature, etc. This is all modeled from computer models that use satellite forecasts, and so sometimes it's not real data, but you can always go in and find the real data and look at the actual stuff and compare models to plots there. So the other thing I wanted to mention, if you go to that website, nohrsc.noaa.gov/earth, that's where you can download the different forecast or different cover models down to Google Earth, and also the individual point data, and explore to your heart's delight. Onto the snow stations. These are maintained by the province, and the ones that we look at, here's the Kettle River watershed in Canada once again, and so the ones that we look at are Greyback, just off the west edge of the watershed, Grano Creek in the middle, Mission Creek just off the northwest corner of the watershed, and Barnes Creek off the northeast point of the watershed. And as an example here, Greyback is now almost fully melted out. If you look at the webcam, there's actually no snow left. There's a little bit of water kind of puddled on the weighing station there. So it's definitely dropped right down. In comparison to, this is Mission Creek, it's started some spring melt now, so it's starting to drop down steeply. That's showing that it's getting that regular melting that I talked about earlier. This is Grano Creek in the middle of the watershed. It stayed fairly high, and in a normal year you can see the snow dropping off by this point, but it stayed fairly high, which is why we say it's above normal. But it really hasn't risen a lot over the last few weeks. It just hasn't dropped a lot, so it's definitely not as sensitive to the type of melting that we've been seeing as the other stations we look at. And then this is Barnes Creek, which is a couple hundred meters lower elevation, just off of Monashee Pass on Highway 6, east of Lumbee, but it's definitely running through into its spring melt pattern now. over the next several days, we've received lots of really great forecast information from Environment Canada, the BC River Forecast Data Center, and Southeast Fire Center for the province. And what we try to do is listen to the meteorologist and take a look at the data that kind of says, well, here's what they said on Friday, how's that tracking over the weekend? So we really like to look at the weather models and what they say about precipitation. What we're hearing is that there's some thunderstorms forecast over the weekend, and there's the potential, depending on the model that you look at, for anywhere from 5 to 30 to 15 to 30 or a little more, depending on the location and depending on the model. So I'll just break that down a little bit. This is a site that you can do to compare different models over different time intervals, meteologics.com, lots of useful data. So right now I'm looking at a model from Europe. Here's the RDKB boundaries, and you can see lots of areas in the watershed are that 10 to 15%, and some areas are between 20 and 30 cumulative precipitation by Monday morning. The American model, which this drives the model that you see, the river forecast model that you see for Ferry that Kristina will be mentioning later on. It's showing on the western part of the watershed, 25 to 30 mils, that green bar right there, and then other portions only 15 to 20. And then the Canadian model, which is the GEM model you'll see in some of the slides, it's showing a similar kind of pattern, but less. We're looking at 5 to 10 mil through 25 to 30. So each of these models, it's hard to predict precipitation, especially in the springtime. We're hearing that the convection, the air from the thunderstorms and that kind of thing, you can sometimes get a heavy rainstorm in one area and the next valley over gets nothing. So there's a lot of variability, and the models are trying to portray that across the surface and share it out. And what that means for the river forecast, Kristina will get into a little bit more. The other source of data that we use is Spot WX. It's the same model data as the previous charts and the same stuff that the River Forecast Center uses, but you click on a point and you get a forecast for that point, which is pretty cool. So this is using Big White is fairly useful because it's that kind of mid to high elevation in the upper part of the watershed. And here it's showing relatively warm, but not super hot temperatures the next few days, and not really getting below freezing much, but not getting above 10 for several days. And some precipitation by Monday. Here you see that kind of 20 to 30 millimeter example. As we look at the Canadian model, this is the GEM one. Likewise, it shows it a little bit warmer, and then a bit more precipitation focusing by Monday. We're looking in that 30 to 40 mil by Monday, but once again, beyond a couple of days and thunderstorms, we're told that it's pretty hard to know what's going on. So, we pay attention to these different things. As we get closer to potential rainstorms and their impact on the watershed, we look to folks like the River Forecast Center to understand what's the impact of that on the river flows. And Kristina's got a good picture now of what the rivers currently look like.
Great, thanks very much. Hi, Kristina Anderson from the Regional District Kootenay Boundary Watershed Planner position. And as Graham was saying, let me just look at sharing the screen here. I will go over some of the information for what we're seeing in terms of the forecasting for the water rivers in the area. So the big one I wanted to start with was the emergency RDKB page, water page, just looking at some of the information. So we've got Frances providing the current updates on the Freshet, everything that's coming through, as well as the latest updates. This is going to be helping you link to any of the sites that I'm going to be speaking about. So it starts talking about all the different real-time water level monitoring and forecasting levels for the West Kettle, the Kettle River, the West Bridge, Granby River. So these are the sites that I'm going to be talking about. And then, of course, the maps, some of the maps that Graham was showing at the very beginning of there. I first wanted to start off and say a big thank you. We've got a number of people that we're calling the division contacts that are a lot of our eyes and ears on the ground out in the different area, the West Boundary, in the Grand Forks area, up the North Fork. in the areas around Greenwood. So thank you very much. It's definitely a big full effort from everybody in the team here to be able to try to get some of these answers and some of the information out there. So it's,
and if I could just add to that too, I completely forgot. I got on a roll, but I've been paying attention to the Friends of the Kettle River Facebook page, and they've got so many great photos, everything from logs rolling down the river, and they're also sharing lots of forecast data and talking about what it means. So really this is a bit of a shout out to folks that like to geek out about the river, and keep on sharing all those great photos as you see things out in the watershed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really, everybody's working together on this one. So thank you very much. So this is a really quick look at, so this is the River Forecast Center. So these are the Canadian river forecasting for the stations in the Canadian system of our watershed. So we've got what they do. This is River Forecast Center. I'll see if I try to get the, I'm just trying to get the legend here. Well, it's sort of at the bottom there. So what this is looking at is, so you can see here the color schemes for return periods. Return periods is how often would we see that flow within 1 year or 2 years. So 1 year, this is likely to happen every single year. This is going to be common, your low-lying flooding, your groundwater intrusion. This is going to be pretty common for every year. This is 2 to 5 years, every 2 to 5 years approximately. Now you could have something coming that is considered a 5-year flow every year for 3 years. It's just, that's the level of flow. So what the River Forecast Center has done, which has been great as a view, they color code it. So this is what they're expecting in the next couple of days. So if we go into the first one, so I focused on the West Kettle because that's, we remember some of Graham's information that was showing you that precipitation, that heavier precipitation on the west side of the boundary watershed. So the West Kettle, it's looking at all the observed information in that dark blue, and then this is what the forecasting. So as we were mentioned, it's all based off that precipitation, temperature, what's happening, what's being forecasted for the weather coming forward. And it's not an exact science. It's really based on what do we know? What's our best guess of what's happening? As Graham mentioned, we've got that variation. So you have that US, the European, the Canadian forecasting precipitation measurements. And so it's really understanding what do we see. As soon as they all group together, then we've got a pretty higher confidence of it, but knowing that there is that uncertainty there. So the River Forecast Center has that high confidence range in the first couple of days. As you go farther out than a couple of days, it becomes that more difficult understanding what might be happening. We aren't looking to see any water levels over this weekend that are going to be outside of what we've already seen in terms of the peaks this year. As you can see back on that May 7th, May 12th, May 13th, earlier this week, we saw some high levels at about that 1 to 2 year range for the West Kettle, and we're keeping it generally below that unless we have a big change in that precipitation component. As we start moving through to the Granby, same thing, we're looking at that lower level for the time being as we start looking until we get outside of this weekend. Coming to the next week, we're looking at a rise. We're talking about that precipitation that potentially might be coming as we start earlier on the end of the weekend, beginning of next week. So if we go over to the NOAA, so we have the 2 stations on the Kettle River down in the States. One is Ferry just south of Midway. The other one is Laurier just south of Grand Forks, Kristina Lake area. So what I'm looking at is 2 different forecasts. So this is the forecast from 2 days ago, May 13th. So what we want to watch here is, this is sort of a nice way of looking at it. On the 16th, so that's tomorrow, it was expecting to be at about just that action level stage. And then on the 20th, the peak coming in higher than the maximum, so almost at that moderate flood stage. So if we go to today's forecast, so now again, you're thinking, okay, we've got that updated forecast, what's happening now? And so we've redone it. So this is 2 days later. So now we're below that action stage of what we're expecting to happen over this weekend. And look, we've really dropped down for what we're expecting for the peak on the 20th. So we're now down below just sort of, I'm calling it the minor flood stage. just for a comparison, 2017 for Ferry was at 2067. So that's outside of this mapping area. So if you can see the arrow, that would have been up above here. So we're quite a ways below that 2017. So we look over at Laurier, I'm gonna do the same thing. So again, that's May 13th. That's 2 days ago, the flood stage. So they don't have their flood information for the Laurier station. So we're just gonna do it based off some of the stars. So this historical max right here, we're coming in at the stage foot at just over 14.75. And then we go into today's forecast. And so you're seeing we've dropped quite a bit. So they reduced the expected precipitation based off some of that information that Graham was showing. And so what it's done is it's reduced the expected peaks coming, and again, that lower amount coming out for the weekend. Not expected to go outside of any of our highs in the next couple of days that we've already experienced, but we're certainly still watching to what might be happening in the future in the next week or so.
Great.
That's it.
Thanks, Kristina. And Chris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Chris Marsh. I'm the Emergency Operations Center Deputy Director for 2020 Freshet. Our Emergency Operations Center is still fully functional. All of our resources within the Emergency Operations Center are dedicated towards monitoring and responding to the 2020 Freshet for the Boundary region at this time. We continue to watch what's happening, and as you can see, there's lots of advanced planning work going into this and a lot of monitoring. And of course, we are getting great information from residents and from partners across the region. We do have a number of sand locations available for people's use if they do feel the need to sandbag at this time, or they have specific situations where that's needed. We're not recommending widespread sandbagging at this time, but certainly for people who have seen issues in the past, they're more than welcome to get sand from a number of locations. Beaverdale, Westbridge, Rock Creek, and the arena at Grand Forks all have sand and sandbags available, and Midway also has sandbags available. We do have our temporary flood protective works. They continue to be staged in Grand Forks. Again, we're not looking at needing to install those at this time, but great to know that they're there, and we've been working with the City of Grand Forks just to make sure that we're ready to deploy those, and we know where they're going to go and how they're going to go in when we need to do that, if we do need to do that. This is a great opportunity over this long weekend to think about your own personal preparedness. Things like making sure that farm equipment and RVs are out of low-lying areas, checking your sump pumps. If you do traditionally have problems with water on your property, just remaining vigilant and keeping an eye on that. And we'll have members of the Emergency Operations Center doing that through the weekend as well, keeping tabs on forecasting and river levels and things like that. And then we just wanted to also mention, you know, we certainly feel for the communities that were affected by flooding over the last several years. This freshet has been long and drawn out, and we've had high levels in our rivers for some time now. That's been good for us because we haven't had damage because of that, but and it's helped us move a lot of water, but it's very stressful for a lot of people. So just know that we're thinking of everyone who has been affected by floods in the past, and you know, we'll remain vigilant, and we'll keep on this file until we're through this stage, which hopefully over the next week to 2 weeks, we start to see some reductions in our river systems. So thanks everyone for your hard work and your feedback, and please let us know if you see any issues.
Thanks everybody, and emergency.rdkb.com will put up the latest information, including this video. So take care, and everybody have a good long weekend.
Have a good long weekend. Bye.